Two people can walk through the same heat. They can both sweat through their shirts. They can both come home feeling hot, tired, and sticky. But one of them barely smells at all, and the other notices body odor almost immediately. That sounds like a small thing, but it confuses a lot of people, because most people grow up believing one simple idea. The more you sweat, the more you smell. It sounds logical, but it is not always true, and that is why this matters. Because sweating and smelling are connected, but they are not the same thing. Some people really do sweat a lot and still have very little odor. Not because they are doing something magical, not because they are automatically cleaner than everyone else, and not because their body is unusual in some bad way. In many cases, it comes down to biology. The kind of sweat their body makes, the bacteria living on their skin, the areas where sweat collects, and even genetics. So in this video, we are going to break this down in a simple, clear way. Why sweat itself is usually not the real smell. Why some sweat is more likely to lead to odor. Why skin bacteria matter so much. And why some people seem naturally less likely to smell, even when they sweat a lot. Once you see the full picture, this becomes much easier to understand. Sweat is normal. Odor is more complex. And that difference explains a lot. Let's start with the biggest misunderstanding. Sweat itself is usually not what smells. That surprises many people at first. Because when people notice body odor, they naturally blame the sweat. But sweat on its own is usually close to odorless. In simple terms, your body can produce sweat to cool you down without that sweat automatically creating a strong smell. So where does the smell come from? Usually, it starts after sweat reaches the skin. Once it sits there, it mixes with the bacteria that already live on the surface of the body. Those bacteria begin breaking down parts of that moisture and some of the materials in it. That process can produce odor. So sweat is part of the story, but it is not the whole story. The smell usually comes from the interaction between sweat and the skin environment. That is why two people can sweat in almost the same way and still smell very different. The real question is not only how much are you sweating. The real question is, what kind of sweat is it? Where is it happening? And what is happening on the skin after that? That is where things begin to change from one person to another. And that is why someone can have a sweaty forehead, back, or chest, and still not have much odor at all. Because not all sweat behaves the same way. If you used to think sweat itself was the smell, you are not alone. A lot of people believe that. But the body is more interesting than that. Your body has two main types of sweat glands, and this is one of the most important parts of the whole topic. The first type is called eccrine glands. These are found almost all over the body. Their main job is simple. They help cool you down. When your temperature rises, these glands release sweat that is mostly water and salt. This is the kind of sweat you get in hot weather, during exercise, or any time your body is trying to lower its temperature. This kind of sweat is usually less linked to strong body odor. It is mostly cooling sweat. Then there is the second type. These are called apocrine glands. They are found mainly in areas like the armpits and groin, and this is where odor becomes more relevant. Apocrine sweat is different. It is thicker. It contains more organic material. And when that material meets bacteria on the skin, odor is more likely to develop. So one simple way to remember this is this. Eccrine sweat is mostly cooling sweat. Apocrine sweat is more odor-prone sweat. That does not mean apocrine sweat is bad. It simply means it is more likely to be broken down into odor-producing compounds once bacteria get involved. And this helps explain something many people have noticed in real life. A person can sweat a lot during exercise and still not smell that strong. Another person may not look as sweaty overall, but may notice a stronger odor under the arms. That is not your imagination. Visible sweat and strong odor do not always rise together. Sometimes odor has more to do with sweat type and body location than with total sweat volume. And that is why judging body odor by how wet someone looks can be misleading. Before we go further, tell me in the comments, did you ever think sweat itself was the smell? Comment yes or no. Now let's go one step deeper. Even odor-prone sweat still needs something else. It needs the skin environment, and especially it needs microbes. Your skin is home to a whole microscopic community. That includes bacteria and other microbes that naturally live there. This is normal. It is part of healthy human skin. But not everyone has the exact same skin microbiome. And that difference may help explain why some people smell less than others. When sweat reaches the skin, microbes interact with it. Some bacteria are better at breaking down sweat-related materials into odor-producing compounds. Others may be less active in that process. So if one person has a skin environment that is less likely to turn sweat into strong-smelling compounds, that person may sweat and still have very little odor. Meanwhile, another person with a different skin microbiome may develop odor more quickly under similar conditions. This is one reason body odor can feel so personal and so inconsistent. It is not only about hygiene, it is not only about how often you shower, and it is not always about how much deodorant you use. Sometimes the skin ecosystem itself is simply different. That is important to understand. Because people can become very self-conscious around this topic. They assume that if they smell more, they must be doing something wrong. But biology is not always that simple. Two people can have very different odor patterns even with similar habits. One person may use very little deodorant and still seem fine. Another person may wash carefully, change clothes often, and still notice odor returning quickly. That does not automatically mean one person is cleaner than the other. In many cases, it means their skin chemistry and skin microbiome are different, and that difference affects how odor forms. This is also why some parts of the body smell stronger than others. Not every sweaty area creates the same result. The forehead may sweat a lot. The back may sweat a lot. But places like the armpits are more likely to produce odor because of the gland type there, the moisture level, reduced airflow, and the microbes in that area. So when we ask why some people sweat but do not smell much, one strong answer is this: because their skin may not turn that sweat into much odor, or at least not as much as it does in someone else. And for some people, that difference may go even deeper. It may be influenced by genetics. This part surprises many people. Yes, genetics may play a role in body odor. Researchers have linked a gene called ABCC11 to differences in underarm odor. Without getting too technical, certain genetic differences may affect how much odor-related material the body releases in areas like the armpits. And if the body releases less of those odor precursors, bacteria on the skin have less raw material to work with. Less raw material may mean less odor. This is one important scientific explanation for why some people truly do sweat but hardly smell. And it may explain something many families notice without fully understanding. Sometimes one person in a family seems to develop body odor very easily. Another person barely does, even with similar weather, similar foods, and similar routines. That may not be random. It may partly reflect inherited biology. This also removes a lot of unnecessary shame from the topic, because body odor is often treated like a personal failure. But in reality, part of it may simply come down to how your body is built. And the opposite is true too. If you are someone who rarely smells much, that is not always because you are more disciplined than everyone else. Sometimes your biology is simply making that easier. So when we look at this honestly, we have to move away from blame. A lot of this is not about moral effort. It is about sweat type, skin microbes, body chemistry, and genetics. And when those factors line up in a certain way, a person can sweat quite a bit and still have very little odor. Have you ever noticed this in your own family? One person seems to never smell much, while another notices odor very quickly. If that sounds familiar, comment family below. Now, this does not mean odor is fixed forever. Body odor can change, and that matters. Because some people are naturally low odor most of the time, but then notice changes during stress, diet shifts, hormonal changes, medications, or certain health conditions. That can happen. Because body odor is not completely static. It can change with the body. Food is one example. Some foods may affect how a person smells. Things like garlic, onions, alcohol, and very spicy foods can sometimes make body odor more noticeable. Hormones can matter too. That is one reason body odor often changes around puberty. Children can sweat, of course. But stronger adult-style body odor usually becomes more noticeable after puberty, when apocrine glands become more active. Stress is another factor. Some people do not smell much during regular physical sweating, but notice a stronger odor during emotional stress. That is a real experience for many people. Some medications may also change body odor, and in some cases, an underlying health issue may affect how a person smells. That does not mean every odor change is serious. Most are not. But it does mean the body is dynamic. So even if someone is usually the kind of person who sweats without much smell, there may still be times when that pattern shifts. That is part of being human. And it brings us back to the main point of this video. Heavy sweating and strong body odor are not the same thing. A person can sweat a lot because they exercise often, live in a humid climate, run warm naturally, or simply have a very active cooling system. But if their sweat is mostly eccrine, if their skin microbiome produces less odor, and if their biology gives bacteria less odor-related material to work with, they may still smell very little. That combination is very real, and it helps explain why some people sweat more without developing much body odor. On the other hand, someone who does not appear extremely sweaty may still notice stronger odor, because the conditions for odor formation are more favorable on their skin. So again, the visible amount of sweat is only one part of the story, and often not the most important part. If this topic has ever made you compare yourself to other people, you are not alone. A lot of people do that quietly. They wonder why one person seems fresh after sweating all day, while another person feels self-conscious much sooner. The answer is usually not one single thing. It is a combination. Type of sweat, area of the body, bacteria on the skin, genetic background, hormones, diet, stress. All of these can shape the final result. That is why sweating is normal for everyone. But smelling is much more individual. Before we close, there is one more practical point worth mentioning. Most differences in body odor are normal. But if your body odor changes suddenly, becomes much stronger than usual, or shifts in a way that feels very unusual for you, it may be worth paying attention. Not because it always means something serious. It often does not. But because a sudden change can sometimes reflect a shift in diet, stress, medication, hormones, skin condition, or a health issue worth discussing with a qualified clinician. The key is not fear. The key is awareness. Your body has patterns, and when those patterns change clearly and persistently, it is reasonable to notice. That is a calm and healthy way to look at it. Not panic, just awareness. So here is the big takeaway. Some people sweat but do not smell much because sweat itself is usually not the true source of odor. Odor tends to appear when certain kinds of sweat, especially in areas like the armpits, interact with bacteria on the skin. And that whole process is shaped by the kind of sweat glands a person has, the microbes living on the skin, and in some cases, genetics. That means body odor is not simply about how much you sweat. It is about what kind of sweat it is, what happens after it reaches the skin, and what kind of biological setup your body already has. Once you understand that, the mystery becomes much easier to explain. Sweating is normal. Odor is more complex. And for some people, biology really does make them less likely to smell, even when they sweat. If this video helped clarify something you have wondered about for a long time, comment clear below. And if you enjoy simple, science-based videos that explain what your body may be telling you, subscribe and stay with us. This video is for educational purposes only and does not replace medical advice.